I think we're ready to go. If you can admit everyone, please, Udi.
Okay, I'm letting everyone in.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to session 5 of the Bioregional Conversations. This is a series of 7 conversations exploring the different ways in which bioregioning is taking shape around the world. It's really great to see all of you here. So please go to the chat and introduce yourselves and tell us which bioregion you're joining us from. As we're getting started, I just want to remind you that this meeting is being recorded and it's also being live streamed on Bioregional TV on YouTube. And I'll pop the link in the chat in a second in case you want to share it with your network. Later in the week, the edited video of this session will also be made available on our website. And I'll also share the link to that for you. So just a quick reminder that these conversations are an effort to prototype a more formal action learning program on bioregioning. And with that in mind, we've created a short Google form that would be ever so grateful if you would complete so that we can understand over the course of these sessions what's working well and inspiring in you and where we can improve. So without further ado, I'll pop the link to the links in the chat. And now I'll hand over to Udi Mandel of the Enliven Cooperative in Hawaii, who's going to be in conversation with Juan Manuel Crespo of the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, and Noah Lincoln, who is the Assistant Professor of Indigenous Crops and Cropping Systems at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. Over to you, Udi.
Thanks, Kate. Aloha and a warm welcome to everyone. So my name is Udi Mandel, and I'm calling from where I call home right now, which is Hawaii Island, and by the town of Hilo. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Aloha, everyone. I'm Kelly Tamey. I'm Udi's partner, but I've also been involved with bioregioning education work for a long time. I also call Hilo my home, and we live in the area of Keaukaha.
So please go to the chat and tell us about your bioregion or place that you call home, so we can see where you're from. So as Kate mentioned, we'll be talking today with Juan Manuel Crespo from the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance and with Noah Lincoln, Assistant Professor of Indigenous Crops and Cropping Systems at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we'll be discussing what bioregioning means to us. There'll be some questions around bioregional governance, and especially in relation to Indigenous communities. We'll be talking about questions of scale of the bioregion, and also how we might engage with Indigenous knowledge systems, and also the challenges of researching and practicing bioregionalism. The format is that first I'll outline the background of these conversations and then talk about how we have approached these topics in our own organization later after the conversations. I'll ask Noah and Juanma to talk about who they are and what is going on in their bioregions, and also I'll facilitate a conversation between the four of us. And this will take around an hour. And in the last half hour, we're going to open it up to the floor and to have your questions as well. And when it gets to that point, please use the raise hand icon in the Zoom to ask a question or make an observation. So each session, as Kate said, is being recorded and will be available in the Bioregional Learning Center website. If English is not your first language, there is a captions option that you can find at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you can choose which language you'd like the captions in. If you have any problems with this, please place a message in the chat and Kate will respond. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about where this initiative has come from. I am one of a group of 7 bioregional practitioners who make up the core team that is convening these conversations. You've seen our names in the invites that you have received, and we call ourselves the Bioregional Learning Circle. And we're happy to see all of you sitting here around us as part of a wider learning circle that we are calling in. We came together after the Bioregional Regeneration Summit in the autumn of 2022, which was organized by Isabel Carlisle and others. And as there was a clear request for more guidance in how to start up new bioregions, we came together to think this through. So we think bioregioning is important because we believe that we need new landscape-sized structures to help us evolve our capacity to work with systems, geosystems, human systems, and ecosystems. We also need a new story in response to climate change, biodiversity collapse, and faltering human governance. Bioregions and bioregioning tell a powerful and very old story of possibility that brings us together in the service of life itself. As my Learning Circle colleague Stuart Cowan puts it, bioregional scale landscapes are a natural unit of regenerating life, large enough to build systemic resilience for the disruptions ahead, small enough to fall in love with. So we've been meeting and thinking of the past year into how best to create a resource for bioregioning. These conversations are a first step into the open so that your feedback is really, really important, because we want this, what we're trying to do is partly design a lab and partly an expanding community of practice through this course. And our core inquiry is, what are the skills and capacities needed to work at bioregional scale? And how do we grow these in people and places so that more can join us? We want to engage and support people who have the capacity to make change happen. People really need to get practical about this and get their feet on the ground. So we're teaching the nuts and bolts of how to do this work, especially to young people. We recognize that many would be bioregional practitioners at first base and are looking for a different set of resources, employing different skills to the places that they've been operating in for longer. And we're quite clear that this course will not be full of theory. Instead, it will focus on practice around the world, stories from the grassroots and real-world case studies, our own experiences and the experiences of our colleagues. And we're clear that there is no orthodoxy in bioregioning. Every place does it differently, with a different constellation of skills, which makes coming up with a definition of what bioregioning is challenging. However, there are shared threads that run through all bioregioning work, and I'm going to name a few here, while others will become clear throughout these conversations. First, we are grounded in our places and are working both at the human scale of face-to-face meetings and at the international scale of this network of practitioners. Second, we are stretching our minds to think in systems, but not getting lost in complexity. In the narrative that is emerging around bioregioning, human culture and the natural world go hand in hand. And we keep connecting things up from being just a load of actions into a coherent strategy. And finally, it is very hard to do this work without a central organization or learning center that is committed to holding it long term. For that reason, we're reaching out to existing centers of learning, the smaller and more innovative, the better, that would like to teach from their bioregions. So I'm going to just very, very briefly just say a little bit about who the Enliven Cooperative is. And then I'm gonna straight away introduce our speakers and then have more time for the facilitated conversation and for your questions as well later. So I'm part of an organization called the Enliven Cooperative. You can see there on the slide. So we're a worker-owned, not-for-profit, eco-social organization. We have members in different parts of the world who are doing work in that region, in that different part of the world. And hopefully, if I have a little bit of time, I'll share a bit about what we're doing here in Hawaii. And what we are doing is we're imagining learning, research and collaboration in support of people, grassroots communities, and organizations with tools, practices, and sensibilities to co-construct intercultural and ecological world. Many of us have a background in teaching, in academia, but also engage with the various kinds of organizations, grassroots movements, and other things happening, social movements in our parts of the world. I'll come back to this point later in the conversation piece about the intercultural, because that's something that's been coming up in in the different sessions, if you've been attending them, where this idea of how do we combine different kinds of knowledges together to do this kind of bioregional work. So could be modern scientific knowledge from various disciplines, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems. What is the nature of this work? We've referred to in previous sessions as two-eyed seeing. But as we'll probably point out in the conversations, the complexity of this work is considerable given the many challenges of the encounter of different knowledge systems that's happened historically due to imbalances of power, the legacies of colonialism, and so forth. So how to do this kind of work is really challenging, but also as we are all engaging with a really important kind of work as well. So we bring together the principles of cooperativism. So we are cooperative, but also in what we're learning obviously from nature, things around biomimicry, and also just being aware and sensitive to multiple environments, but also engaging with the knowledges of a place that have been doing that kind of work for a really long time. And we organize ourselves as an eco-social learning and action research cooperative. So we have this notion of enlivening how we learn, how we relate, how we do research work as being a kind of a core principle of our orientation. Do you want to add anything about?
No.
No.
No, I think.
So I'll go a little bit more into the actual practices maybe later when I facilitate the questions, but I wanted to be more focused now on the work of these other two bioregions. So I'm very happy to have with me today two wonderful individuals that I call friends and colleagues. So I think I'll start with Noah Lincoln. Also from the same place where we are here right now, from Hawaii Island, to share more about his work.
Okay, well, aloha ina kua, aloha ina aumakua, aloha kako. Hello, good morning, everybody, or whatever time it is for you. As Udi said, my name's Noah Kekuewa Lincoln, here from the island of Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific. I do apologize. I'm kind of getting over a bad sickness right now, but happy to be here and have the opportunity to share with you guys today. Sorry, just pull up. Just real quick. Yeah, so today I hope to share with you guys a little bit kind of about traditional Hawaiian land management and how that relates to bioregioning, and then briefly share about how we are trying to work with our governing agencies today to apply that to some programs. And I apologize, I made way too many slides, so we're gonna move fast as we go through, particularly the first half of this. So I like to start a lot of my talks just with a Olelo No'eau, kind of a wise saying of our past, and I thought this one was apt for the concept of bioregioning. He ali'i no ka aina, he kaua vale ke kanaka. The land is chief and the people merely servants. And so just kind of wanted to put that out there for you guys to keep in mind as we go through our talk today. So I want to start briefly by just talking about Hawaii as a model system. Figure not everybody here is super familiar with our small islands in the Pacific. But Hawaii is an amazing natural experiment in that we are extremely organized with really broad environmental gradients. And so the first of those is the age of the islands. We stem from a stationary hotspot, so the islands emerge one after another. And so we have a very orderly age gradient to the islands with brand new lava still emerging on Hawaii Island where we're at. And as you travel up the chain, the islands get older and older, up to Kauai, that's about 5.5 million years old. And on top of this age gradient, you can overlay some of the most impressive rainfall gradients on the planet. We have areas of the state that are true deserts, receiving less than 150 millimeters of rain a year. And we have some of the wettest locations on the planet. And again, these rainfall gradients are extremely organized over the islands, with our windward sides tending to be much wetter, leeward sides drier. And there's an area on Kohala Mountain on the northern part of Hawaii Island. You can walk from a true desert to at about 170 or so millimeters of year rain, up to an area of about 6,000 millimeters of rain per year. And you can make that walk in about 4 hours and traverse almost the entire rainfall moisture gradient of our planet in a very, very short time span. Very few places in the world you can do that. These primary factors of age and rainfall interact to form secondary factors on the landscape. So topography is a function of the substrate age and the amount of rainfall it receives. So you can see here in the upper left is a young landscape, very smooth, undissected. As you come to the upper right, it's still quite young. That's about 500,000 years old on Kohala Mountain. And here the windward side on the right is starting to become dissected and big river valleys emerging, while the leeward side on the left side remains smooth. In the lower right on Maui, that's about 1.5 million years old. Now both your windward and your leeward sides are heavily dissected in the mountains, and your river valleys are really, really starting to get in. And then you get up to Kauai, where basically the entire windward side has eroded away, and you're deeply dissected on your leeward side. So very strong landscape, topographical evolution. And rainfall and the substrate age also interact to drive soil type and soil fertility. So Hawaii is very diverse. I believe we have 12 of the 13 soil orders on the planet, ranging of everything from undeveloped histosols, brand new volcanic soils, everything up to highly weathered oxysols on Kauai. So tremendous diversity of soil properties and fertility. And all of this interacts with a broad climate and broad soils to drive highly diverse ecosystems. So the island of Hawaii alone, we have 2/3 of the Holdridge life zones located on a single island, representing tremendous ecological diversity. And of course, diversity then drives diversity. So our ecological diversity turns around and drives biological diversity. And so we have tremendous speciation and adaptive radiation that occurred here in the islands, causing us to have a very high degree of endemic species. And we talk about this all the time in the conservation world, but the point I want to make by sharing the slide about adaptive radiation is that we don't often take the next step and consider that humans are the same, and that under diverse ecological drivers, humans also adapt to diverse ecosystems. Not necessarily in the sense that we speciate and become new species, but certainly in terms of our cultural adaptations. And the adaptation of practices and norms are closely tied to ecological diversity, at least in the Hawaii case. So that's just a little bit of background, and now I just want to share a bit about kind of the bioregioning, basically political eco-management of traditional Hawaii, so prior to European arrival in the islands. So again, our islands are extremely diverse ecologically. And as our ancestors arrived in Hawaii, Hawaii is quite different than the South Pacific in terms of our environment, in terms of the islands themselves. And so when the Polynesian people arrived in Hawaii, they found new environments that was not really in their ancestral memory and that they had to adapt to in terms of their practices. And one of the most common ways, or fundamental ways, I should say, that people adapt to their environment is through agriculture and agricultural practices. And as we'll demonstrate in the next few minutes, Hawaiians did have a very, very diverse set of agricultural practices that were closely tied to the basic kind of ecological parameters of the landscape. Um, and to facilitate this, over time, they developed a hierarchical system of political divisions that were highly based and interactive with the ecology. So at the largest region, you had what were called moku. Um, and these are maybe, if we had to compare it to the United States anyway, and the moku might be like the states themselves. But the moku were political ecoregions. Um, and so this is an example from a colleague of mine. This is the island of Kauai. Um, and just he colorized the island based on environmental parameters. So red is temperature, green is solar radiation, blue is rainfall. And then the black lines here are the moku divisions. And you can see how the moku are very strongly delineated by kind of their overall environment. And this closely relates to how the landscapes were used in terms of their agriculture. So a project we did a few years ago was to understand the extent of a famous agricultural system known as the Pa Kukui. It was a shifting system based on the candlenut tree. And here, what we did was map every kukui and breadfruit tree along the Hamakua coast. So every yellow dot here is a kukui tree. And I apologize to the undergraduate researcher who manually clicked on 29,000 trees across the coast. And the larger green dots are breadfruit trees. And when we started this project, the first thing we noticed very clearly was that in the south, there was a lot of breadfruit going up the coast, up the coast, up the coast, and you hit this midpoint in an area called Laupahoehoe, and breadfruit suddenly drops off the landscape. And so we used that division to start to look at or to analyze the tree data. And what we found, oh, that's just the same image, sorry. Yeah, so in the north, no breadfruit. In the south, breadfruit, kukui throughout the region. And when we look at the distribution of kukui trees and we break it up by that north-south delineation, we see sharp differences in their distribution occurring to almost twice the elevation in the north, less distribution in the south. And we also see a sharp shift in the soil fertility occurring at the same point, with the south having a lower soil fertility index. And right at that point where breadfruit drops off and kukui is grown further up the landscape, we see this big spike in soil fertility. And all of this occurs at a very critical political division, humu'ula, that divided the mokus of Hilo and Hamakua. And so all of this, I know it's going fast, but all of it is to say is that there's really, really strong evidence that there were large-scale forestry management regimes that were aligned to these political divisions, the moku, and that these political divisions aligned with large-scale shifts in environmental parameters, in this case, soil fertility, even though that soil fertility is not something necessarily visible on the landscape. Nested within the moku, within the region, were a division called the ahupua'a. And the ahupua'a are demonstrated in the light dashed lines here for the island of Oahu. And they're generalized as pie-shaped wedges extending from the ocean to the mountain peak. And so they cut across the environmental gradients. So they'll go up the mountain, so they'll cross ecotones within each division. And this is kind of your highly genericized ahupua'a division. But just to give you a sense of their layout, in that they were often centered on watersheds or somehow centered around water. And again, extending from the coast up into the mountains to allow for fair access to a broad range of resources, so that you would have access to the ocean, you would have access to the coast for living, you'd have access to the lowland plains for agriculture, you'd have access to the upland forest for forest resources, and so on. And just another example from our work is that as we look at a single ahupua'a, they do tend to utilize banded zones of agroecology as you move up the mountain. And so this is an example from the Kona region on the Big Island, demonstrating these different agroecological zones of their ahupua'a. And as we looked at one particular zone, the Kalaulu, which was a famous breadfruit belt of the Kona region that you can see depicted in this 1827 drawing, the breadfruit trees cutting across the landscape there. And we did a lot of work looking at where and why this breadfruit zone was exactly where it was. And again, with not a whole lot of time, kind of jump to the punchline. But when we look at the delineation of this zone depicted in our model here, if we look at the north-south distribution, actually, you know what, that's not important. What is important is that if we look at breadfruit habitat in the north, we see that along the left edge of the breadfruit zone here, the habitat and the breadfruit zone align quite well, meaning that you had an environmental limitation that didn't allow you to grow breadfruit any further towards the ocean. But on the upper edge, the mountain edge, you had quite a lot of breadfruit habitat left. And similarly, in the northern edge, the rainfall starts to drop off as you wrap around the mountain, and you couldn't grow breadfruit anymore. But in the southern edge, the breadfruit habitat continues much farther south. And again, just kind of moving through quickly, when we look at this layout and this delineation of agroecology up the mountain, we found a lot of influencing factors of why and where these zones were. There were certainly aspects of environmental limitation where the environment was dictating what was happening. But more commonly, there were aspects of cultural preference and environmental consideration. And then we also see very strong evidence, which I don't have time to talk about, but about political feedback in these systems as well. And then just to round it out, the final land division in Hawaii is known as ili. And these are kind of the extended family corporate tenure units. And this is just an example of the ili in one area. So in this image, your moku that we started with are in orange. The Ahupua'a are in the yellow, and then the Ili are in the black. And so, yeah, because of our ecological diversity, again, we had tremendously diverse agricultural systems imposed on our landscape. And because of the orderliness of Hawaii, we're actually able to model these systems with pretty high accuracy. And so this has been something we've been working on over the last 7 or 8 years, and kind of just put out these models within the past year, validated with archaeology and a bunch of historical sources to know that they're about 85% accurate. And relevant to the bioregioning conversation is that, some of our local governance today have picked up on these models. And so we're actually in the process right now of entering a cooperative service agreement with the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And they actually want to use these models, use these traditional bioregioning of our ancestors to inform their program funding, so that they might, for instance, only fund agroforestry where traditional bioregioning indicated that agroforestry was the appropriate agricultural practice. And so we're kind of in the early stages of taking this from understanding our traditional bioregioning into thinking about how we might apply it into the legislature and the management of our government here in Hawaii today. And so that is it for me. Didn't go too much over the 15 minutes. Sorry, Udi. But yeah, thank you all. And I'll pass it back to our MC.
Oh, Udi, you're
Thank you.
Just
Thank you, Noah. That was
that
was amazing, and yeah, really incredible. And I've got a bunch of questions which we'll follow up with as well after we hear from Juan Manuel Crespo from the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance. So we're traveling to a completely different part of the world, and also environment and scale. So Juan Manuel, do you want to take it away?
Thanks, Udi. Thanks, Noah. That was an amazing journey through Hawaii in the history. So I'm very glad to be here with you, with everyone. I'm Juan Manuel Crespo. I'm from Ecuador. I'm based in Quito, Ecuador, but I've been working for the last decade on the Amazon region, bioregion, and more specifically around the last 5 years, more or less, with the Amazon Sacred Headwaters initiative that right now is an alliance of indigenous peoples and NGOs. So I will share my screen. I'm very happy to be with you and be able to share this process with you. Okay, now you're seeing my screen, right? Well, this is an approximation that I want to do from the Amazonian territories, like this idea of bioregionalism, and specifically the case of the Amazon Sacred Headwaters. Just to begin with, I want to put these two topics on for the conversation. First, I want to share with you and introduce to you the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Alliance as an attempt of bioregional, intercultural, and plurinational governance initiative. I think that this is maybe the most challenging and more interesting point of this alliance, and also share with you some of the bioregional planning and learning design that we have been trying to lift up. And this is an ongoing skill development that we're trying to see if it's going to fit. And we think that is going to be very useful for not only for the Amazon, but for different bioregions around the world. So just to begin, I want to share with you what's the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative about. This initiative was born in 2017 between the indigenous nationalities of the Amazon of Ecuador and Peru. They make an urgent call to protect a mega diverse bioregion of more than 35 million hectares. 60% of this bioregion is composed of protected areas and indigenous territories. So it's a very interesting, very particular bioregion. And in this process, they have been lifting a bioregional plan, trying to articulate realistic and viable solutions to address economic and social challenges that this region is facing, right? Just to put you into the map, this is South America, and this what's in this blue line is the bioregion of Amazon sacred headwaters. I wanted to show you this because this is a study that Baz and colleagues made in 2010 that show how is biodiversity in the whole Amazon importance. And you can see that the most important hotspot of biodiversity through the whole, all of this is the Amazon biome. But in just the hotspots of biodiversity are located here in this zone of Peru, and especially the most important zone, the hotspot of biodiversity, is in this spot that is just between the Ecuadorian Amazon and the Peruvian border, more or less. That's exactly where Amazon Headwaters Initiative and bioregion is. And this is the Yasuni National Park. If you remember, or some of you could know that this was a national park that was threatened by oil industries, and it's still threatened, but civil society has been struggling to stop this kind of industry because of the importance of biodiversity in this zone. So this is the bioregion between Ecuador and Peru. And this is the importance of the biodiversity that we are talking about this bioregion. Just to let you know more or less what kind of region. This is the point where the Andes range collides with the Amazon region, right? So this is the kind of altimetry that we have in this bioregion, where you go from almost 6,000 meters altitude in the glaciers of the Andes in Ecuador, and you can go through all these all until Iquitos, more or less. That is more or less 600 kilometers from Chimborazo in direct line to that is more or less at less than 500 meters. So this is the kind of range that gives you so much biodiversity. The different altitudes give us this opportunity of having maybe the most biodiverse places in the earth. So this is the particularity of this bioregion. Just to show you very, very quick, I'm also going to jump a lot of slides, but I wanted to give you some screenshots. This is the hydrography that we have in this bioregion. Is very rich in water because of these glaciers that are coming through to the Amazon. This is the kind of ecosystems that we have. More or less 50 kind of ecosystems that lives in this bioregion between Andes and Amazon, and this linkage between this kind of region. We also have, this is the carbon absorption of this bioregion that is very, very important in carbon absorption. And this is what the governance is about. And this bioregion lives more than 30 peoples and nationalities, indigenous peoples and nationalities from Ecuador and Peru. And you can see here some of their names. Achuara, Wahun, Andoas, Arabelas, Candosis, Capanahuas, Shawis, Cucamas, Iquitos, Chihuas, Quichuas. There are a lot of indigenous peoples with their own territories, with their own languages, and they are struggling in very similar situation, but they have very particular differences because there are some regions that are more threatened than others, but still the problem is systemic. So our idea was to map from the beginning how the indigenous territories are like being together in a way that we are putting them together through the bioregion that it was built because of this alliance. So it's a very nice mosaic of interculturality and plurinationality. That's something that in the Ecuadorian constitution, for example, is something that has been put like an important right to recognize interculturality and plurinationality as a base of the Ecuadorian state. But here's the problem: when you have two states in this point, the Peruvian case is not the same. So we're struggling in that area, for example, in terms of governance, how you give more rights to people that their state is not recognizing. So this was some of the challenges that we faced building this initiative, right? So just to give you a quick look, what was about the bioregional plan that Amazon Sacred Headwaters pushed. This was the vision of the plan. That was a vision towards the 2030, where this bioregion is permanently protected and restored as a living bioregion, inspired by indigenous peoples, forest stewardship, vision, and practices, right? So the idea was to envision that in 2030, the people and forests are flourishing with a prosperous and inclusive well-being economy. The region is contributing to reversing global warming and biodiversity loss, and is an inspiring model for a just ecological transition. And this is going to be key, the key idea that this could be an inspiring model for an ecological transition, okay? These were the big objectives of the plan that we built at that moment. First, this was like a defense objective that had to do with stop extractive industries in this area, eliminate degradation and forest loss. That was something that is very important to stop if you want to fight for something, because we are losing them. All of that, all the biodiversity and all the culture that live here are in big danger, and we know that, and we need to stop them in a way. So these were like the two main defensive objectives, and then there was more proactive objectives, like the ensuring of indigenous territorial governance, how we make sure that indigenous territories have the sovereignty and have the empowerment to build their own ways of living and to protect their territories. And also, as a big goal, objective was to promote forest conservation and restoration. And as a whole idea of the initiative was to consolidate sorry, I don't know what happened, was to consolidate Amazonian well-being. So this was a very long process, more or less 18 months of just building the process around a lot of workshops with indigenous organizations, with NGOs, with consultants, expert technicians. Was a very rich process that we built in the terrain. This was just like a parenthesis. This was made just before the pandemic and in the first months of the pandemic. But that was a big challenge because the indigenous territories were very threatened at that point. A lot of indigenous people were very damaged because of the COVID-19. So this was a challenging process at the moment. But this was just before we got into the pandemic. And well, we at the end, the conceptual idea of the plan, I'm not going to show you the whole plan, but was to build an ecological and social transition, right? So that this was the key idea of the plan. This is like the conceptual graphic of what was the plan about, was to identify the critical nodes that we have. This was the critical nodes that were giving us to a tipping point of the bioregion and the Amazon and of the world that we know that we are with the current situation, the climate situation, and how we jump that tipping point through a transition, a just transition, a socio-ecological transition that could give us and let us go to the 2030 vision, right? So this was a graphic conceptual idea of it. There was three main key actions that we needed to build, and we needed to maintain the fossil fuels in the ground, create new metrics and new ways of indicators to measure how are we building wellness and WMBV in the region, and support economic alternatives. These are like the three pillars of actions that we needed to promote and to build and implement this transition that we're talking about. Okay, so here I'm going to just map the big and main bioregional governance challenges that I have seen in this process. First, how we deal with external threats, extractive activities, economic model pressures, organized crime that is building a lot in the region. Is an old but a very new issue that we're facing right now, and how to face development planning and infrastructure implementation. The paradigm of development is very difficult to stop, especially when you have big cities that are growing a lot and they need resources. So the Amazon is their main supermarket. So this is the photograph that I think that showed this a lot. These kids like swimming in a clean river, but all this machinery is coming to the Amazon, and that's something that we're dealing every day in the Amazon right now. And then you have political dynamics that you have to face, like general elections in each country, that every time you have new elections, you have a new power dynamics that you have to face. Criminalize of indigenous organizations. A lot of the leaders of the indigenous organizations are being pursued and they are being criminalized in different ways. They are threatened and they have been killed. So that's the reality of this region. Then are also internal organizational conflicts, mainly made by development and economic system pressures, something that happens. Some of the leaders are being corrupted by money, by interest, by power. So it's something that happens. And lack of direct funding to indigenous organizations. There's a lot of different institutions that work in between indigenous organizations, and money is not going into the terrain. That's something that's happening. And then a big challenge that we have is how to monitor, evaluate, and learn in the process. How do we do that? And that's a whole issue that Udi knows a lot also, that's here with us. He helped us a lot in designing a way of how can we learn in this process, and something that we can discuss later on about the challenges that we have there. This is just a small like a comic of how we do with so many elements at the same time. We have to deal with all of these elements and we have to do it well. So that's a main challenge. And just to end, this is a graphic that I'm not going to focus, but this is an intention that we just designed for the bioregional learning process. That's called the bioregional the bioregional cycle. It has to do with this last challenge that I was mentioning. That has to do of how we use the plan in a way that we can measure that we're doing in the right way. How can we learn from this process, and how can we build build resources and implement new actions that's going to empower the plan again. So it's a cycle that we are trying to develop. At this point, we have gone so far as the designing of what we think that we can do, but this is maybe the main challenge for the next years if we want to implement in the reality the original plan for the Sacred Cat Wild. So I'm going to leave it there because I think that I'm over my time, but I wanted to just leave you with this last image of are the basins of South America, and I think that is a very inspiring map of how can South America look if we think more in a bioregional way. And maybe it could be a next map of South America. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm very happy to share with you all of this. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan Manuel. That was great to see the Amazon again, and thank you for that amazing overview of also a sense of the scale of what you're dealing with there in the Amazon bioregion. We have a lot of time, and you also thank you both for making this within the time, so that we have a lot more time now for the conversation and to open up to questions too. So I'm going to ask one question to you both that I think is one that does link the two presentations, and that relates to this term that Juan Manuel, you use the sense of the interculturality of a place like this, and you were referring more, I think, to the issue of the diversity of indigenous groups that live within the bioregion, so and also the plurinationality, this more Latin American concept that you have indigenous nations also coexisting within one nation state. But I wanted to ask not just that sense of interculturality, but also the interculturality of what I began the introductions with, which is the encounter between different ontologies, different ways of being, knowing, doing, and relating in the world, especially within, say, an indigenous cosmovision or cosmology and a more Western scientific. But in your case, Juan Manuel, also wrapped up with that is the paradigm of development. So, if I want to frame that question in a way that kind of relates to you both, one concept that we in Enliven Corp have been working with and exploring a lot and practicing too is this concept, not so much of interculturality, but of what Isabel Stengers, the philosopher of science, called the cosmopolitics, which is that when you have different ontologies meeting, it's often a clash. It's often very destructive especially for indigenous communities historically, or in the case of development, more recently as well. But what is the possibility of a cosmopolitical encounter, the encounter of different ontologies, being in a way that does explore the possibilities of mutual learning, mutual engagement, and then a co-constructing of something different, something more than the sum of the parts. So I want to, first maybe to put it to you, Juanma, what has been, I know the concept of Amazonian buen vivir is like an important paradigm in the context of Ecuador, especially given where it's found in the constitution and so forth. But if you can just engage a little bit with that kind of dynamic of this encounter between these ontologies and how within the work that you're doing, how that might be played out and how that could be something that is encouraged more to create these spaces of encounter and possibility. And I'll just, so you can answer that first, but then Noah, to you, I'd frame that too as in the work that you're doing, that you bring in all of these different also tools and practices within the scientific disciplines and so forth. But I know that you and others are also engaging with different Native Hawaiian ways of being, knowing, doing, and inquiry in how these systems understood the world. So how is that encounter also the nature of that encounter in Hawaii? So maybe first, Juanma, if you want to engage with that question in any way.
Sure. Thanks, Udi. I think that's a very important aspect of what interculturality means, really, because it's not only interculturality, not only for indigenous people at the end. For example, when Ecuador has the constitutional discussion of what does it mean to have a buen vivir paradigm instead of a development paradigm, because we even in the constitution we changed the word development for buen vivir, like the goal as a country. So that's a shift that comes from indigenous conception, and especially of cosmovisions that they have around relationship with nature, around what's the well-being, what's the sense of build of growing. If it's not economic growth at the end, what it should be interested at the end is the well-being of the people and your ecosystem and your habitat, and that's the kind of discussion that we had. But at the end, we can't use only a concept from indigenous communities if we're not all indigenous at the end, you know. So that's why interculturality comes like a very important political concept that we need to embrace it and empower it, because it means that any culture or any ethnic at the end has to give their best like their best knowledge, their best history, your best, I don't know, whatever gives you the identity. You can contribute from your side, but you also can learn from the others. And that mix, I think, that has to do with this cosmopolitics that you are mentioning. It's like the idea of reinforcing for a common goal that we have as a society, as community, in this case as a bioregion. So when we had like these discussions around how we build a bioregion between two countries that at the end are not two countries that are not different countries. We're separated by nation states paradigms. But if you think very more closely and you give it a closer look to what happened in the borderline of Ecuador and Peru, is that there are more common ideas and cultures and languages and heritage between these peoples that live in the Amazon than they have with Quito or Lima. So they are more close between them than their nation states, capitals, you know? So that gives you a sense of what is in stake and what's in the discussion of what's intercultural purpose and what's buen vivir as a paradigm that we are trying to push forward, because we think that is the only way. If we change the system, that's the paradigm that is in our minds, we can change the economic system, and then we can change also the ecological situation and the threats. So is something that we need to reinforce is like how we build interculturality in a way that we can go together into a common goal, that in this case is buen vivir as the paradigm that we're trying to build.
Thank you for that, Juanma. That's wonderful. And Noah, just before you go, Kelly, do you want to add something to that question or to that?
Well, I think I was also just thinking of the concept of aloha aina, which I feel like has some resonance with buen vivir. And I mean, for me, I like the concept of cosmopolitics more than intercultural, because I think it's more directed with the politics that are inevitable, and the term intercultural sounds very neutral, which we all know it's not. So, well, Juanma, thanks for trying to get into that a little more. But I think within the Hawaiian context, because it's in the quote United States, there's less emphasis on the development paradigm, even though it's very strongly here. And so I just wanted, I think adding to what Udi was asking, I wanted to ask you as well, because you mentioned at the end about how NRCS, which is part of the US Department of Agriculture, so part of the federal government, how they're taking on, if they're taking on seemingly more of a Hawaiian kind of paradigm or cosmology, or even a aloha aina way of engaging and legitimizing ways of moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some oh, I don't know if paradox is the right word, but I feel like it on the conceptual level, oftentimes, like, yes, like, and I really agree with what Juan was saying, right? Like, in terms of getting down to the fundamental question of what's really important, right? And what are we trying to achieve? I do feel like there has been a major shift in Hawaii, at least during my lifetime, of being more open and accepting, and listening to Hawaiian culture in particular, at that conceptual level. And then you get nice language and nice like concepts. But then when the rubber hits the road, there's still a huge divide in terms of accepting the details and indigenous knowledge as knowledge, right? So like all the work I've been doing is not like new to the circles I run in, in the cultural circles, but we have to do all that science because like the rule making and the legislative side and the real like policy pieces like still don't listen to indigenous knowledge. Like it still has to go be a scientific publication before it has any validity. So it's like they're listening conceptually, but they're not valuing the actual knowledge pieces yet. So there's still like a little bit of a disconnect in Hawaii. But again, it's light years from where it was like when I was a kid. And even to the point where like, a lot of formal, business or think tank or policy making, meetings will have Hawaiian protocol in it, or some sort of protocol that, takes that time to, you know, build connection and relationship, to acknowledge where we are, to, take a moment to, recognize historical trajectories and, take a moment to think about, well, where are we trying to go in the future? And, that was unheard of when I was a kid. And so, yeah, I think a lot of progress has been made. But yeah, there's still a little bit of a disconnect between like conceptually embracing it, but not fully accepting the knowledge systems and practices yet.
I mean, maybe just a quick follow-up to, because you're talking at this level about the level of legislation and federal and state governments and so forth. But I was wondering too about if you could say something about more at the grassroots level of practice in terms of engaging with not just the concept, but the practice of ahupua'a and ahupua'a restoration. Because one interesting thing about Hawaii, connecting to the concept of bioregionalism that we've been talking about, is that the ahupua'a that you described as you mentioned, is relatively well known within many circles in Hawaii. So it's not probably a lot more than bioregion, as we've been discussing over these conversations. It's still a relatively new concept in many circles, but ahupua'a is widely known here. But increasingly, there's more people that are also engaging with the practices around it. So I don't know if you want to share anything about this kind of ahupua'a restoration or learning across ahupua'a practices.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is kind of the same. um, uh, in that, I think the concept of ahupua'a is embraced, but even the concept itself is really genericized. Uh, and so, I mean, there are, I would say, really strong grassroots, Hawaiian-led efforts that understand the um, the importance, I guess, of the really specific place-based knowledge that like allows the ahupua'a to operate. That like an ahupua'a concept alone, like, is really just a concept. And what allowed, I think, the Ahupua'a to function, was understanding the intricacies of those different places, because they're really, really different. You go to an area in Kona where there's no surface streams, and the water function was based on largely on mist capture and cloud formations, was how those ahupua'a were organized, versus the deep river valleys on the older windward islands, that did have a central river and river valley, like the whole other than like very broad strokes of, yes, our mountain environments and our oceans are connected, like, that beyond that, it takes, I think, a lot of highly detailed knowledge. And again, those knowledge pieces are not quite acknowledged or brought forward enough. And then, when they are, I think then you start also running into some of the conflicts that Juan was lifting up, right? That, okay, well, that's great, but, that's going to cost way too much money, or, that's going to impede this, development, or, so there's, I wish I could be a little bit more positive, but, I do still think, that yeah, my answer kind of remains the same, that conceptually it's embraced, but the knowledge details have yet to been fully incorporated.
Thank you. Thanks, Noah. Can you have a question about this skills learning?
I mean, one thing, I mean, I've been more peripherally involved with this group, this Bioregioning Learning Center group, although Udi's been keeping me up to date. But I guess one thing I'm wondering about, because both of these presentations are centered more within indigenous knowledge systems of what bioregioning is, it doesn't, for me, fit that comfortably. I mean, even the Ahupua'a as it was, or even as it's trying to be now, and what bioregionalism is awkward. It's an awkward fit, because they're two different. I mean, the bioregioning kind of knowledge system as it is, it's coming from an English lit language and other lit language perspective that don't quite connect. I mean, that for me is like a cosmopolitical encounter, just those two concepts. And so I've wondered how within this overarching approach to learning and engagement within a bioregioning perspective, how I guess how these two presentations fit within other bioregioning learning encounters that have happened within this group, if it and what that means in terms of even how learning is organized in and around this. I don't know if I've quite got my question right, maybe.
Well, I mean, maybe just to put it down more in relation to the think about the course, and other questions have been asked is in terms of skills and knowledges for doing bioregioning kind of work. So I was wondering if both of you had any suggestions or practices or things that you've both been engaging with, that what might be some of those tools or skills that people wanting to do this kind of work at a scale of the bioregion. What has been important for both of you to connect the bioregioning concept to the work that you're doing? Juan, you wanna?
I can jump in. I think that maybe, as Kate just said, it's not easy to introduce a bioregion concept so easily. For example, in the territories, for example, in the case of the Amazon, they feel like they are part of the Amazon. They have this identity. I'm talking about the Amazonian territories and their communities and this kind of approach. But at the same time that they have this identity of being part of the Amazon, if you contrast the different parts of the Amazon, because the Amazon is very broad and it's very very diverse at the same time. So you can you can see that it's not so easy to give a very very light way of a common identity at the same time. Is because what's happening in the northern Ecuador Amazon is not the same as the southern Peruvian side, and it's very different. The Amazon that is close to the Andes than the Amazon that's close to the Amazon River. You have problems of fires there, and you have floodings here. So there are different kind of threats. You have oil industry in some parts, you have mining industry in others. So I agree in that sense that it's not easy to introduce like such a light concept like bioregionalism and so easily to just to feel that you're comfort with that. But at the same time, I think that in our case, in our experience, the idea of going to the communities and trying to give a sense that what I was saying, that you have more in common with people that is on the other side of the nation-state border than the national capital of your state, is something that was very, very easy to understand for the people that is living there. It was very intuitive, was very easily to see that, yeah, that's right. I have more to do with those people in the other side of the border than other people that is in my country. So that sense of, in terms of learning, what we learned in the process, was that we needed to give more spaces to meet between them, and have more spaces to of encounter at the end that make them feel that they are part of something together, that they have something in common. Because in the large history of Ecuador and Peru, this border has been, even we had war like for 50 years with Peru. So this was a frontier of a lot of war and was a lot of danger, and something that bioregionalism in a way is being a tool to encounter the peoples that live in this border zone. So for me, the most important lesson that I have been having from this process is that if you give people the space to encounter and to have conversations together, and to have even festivities together, and have this justification that we need to have a workshop maybe, was a very nice way of making them to see how much closer they are from each other than usually their parents on their last generation that they had. So for me, it has been like a very inspiring idea and conceptualization that has let us know that we have some tools that we can use for breaking, especially the nation state solidity, and this nation state the nation state paradigm for me is a very old paradigm that we need to break. And for me, this has been like the power of this concept of bioregion that is kind of helping us to break the conceptualization of nation states. I don't know if I'm answering exactly the question that you're
that's
doing,
great.
but
Thank you. No,
more or less.
that's a great intervention. Thanks, Juan. I don't know if Noah, do you want to add anything to this before I open up to folks and start thinking of any questions?
Yeah,
And
just
ahead.
real quick. So that is super interesting that in some ways we're almost, I think, in Hawaii, like doing the opposite, like that, Hawaiians have kind of all been like grouped together as like one, okay, you're all Hawaiians now, like because the Europeans came from the outside. But, before Europeans came, like there was, four separate kingdoms in Hawaii. And so it's interesting. I mean, I think what's happening is we're finding commonality through the differences in the regions. I don't know how to explain that well. Like, for instance, one of the fights that's been successful here has been around fishery rules. So right, state government, federal government, they like one rule, right? So, okay, we're gonna close moi fishing from June to August for spawning. But the reality is because Hawaii is so diverse, ecologically, the fish actually spawn at different times across the state. And so communities have been getting together to try to define, more localized fishing laws. So they're acknowledging, right? We're all different, ecologically different. We need different management rules. We need different timings. But it's really like through acknowledging the need for really in-depth place-based knowledge, they're also coming together, right? Like that's the commonality. The commonality is like we all care about our resource. We all know it very, very well because we interact with it. And we all acknowledge that we're different. And through that, there's like this really like bonding commonality. It's
Really.
anyway, that was the thought that came to mind
Yeah.
while
No,
Juan was
thank you.
speaking.
Yeah, no, that's really
Yeah, and I
interesting.
agree that acknowledgement and coming together and making space for that is really, really important. So I do want to echo Juan with that, like just taking that time to make the space for people to share that is critical.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think I'm going to open up for any questions or comments people have. Please raise your hand so I can see you, or you can also write on the text if you want. But anybody wants to ask a question? Any comments or maybe Juan or Noah, you have a question for each other too. Marianne, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm in the force of the Northeast. I live at the Serious Intentional Community near Amherst, Massachusetts. And I was really struck by that idea of making the space for people who have really thought of themselves as in different territories, but bioregionally have similar challenges and identities. I wonder if you have had any sort of structuring or thinking around how you're holding those or invitations to that space and convening.
I'm sorry, I just totally blanked out there for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Maybe I don't, Juan, do you want to have a go at that one first? Did you get the question? It was more about how you convene the space for that diversity of ethnicities, nationalities to come together.
Yeah, I think that in the case that I worked with, that is the Amazon Sacred Headwaters, has much to do with the indigenous dynamics that already exist. We don't propose new ways or new methodologies, but more like encounter their own ways. So, for example, usually they have assemblies, communitarian assemblies that are amplified. Like we use their own ways of mixing and convening in a way. That's something that you have to do it not only because of a respectful way of doing, but because it's the way that is going to work at the end. If you propose something new, it's not gonna work at the beginning, at least. It's not gonna work. So is to know very, very good their manners, their cultures, how they usually make that kind of spaces, and be very, very respectful of that, and propose new things in those spaces. Usually they have ceremonies, they have different spaces that have to do with medicine or whatever they want to share, chicha or any beverage, and then you can introduce new conversations, new topics, and that's the way. It's like adapting to the territory and not in the other way. That maybe is what we have been learning from a lot of years of working with them. closely.
Thanks. Noah, did you want to add anything to that? Was a question being
No,
covered
that is
No?
the exact right answer.
Thanks. Melina?
There's just a quick follow-up to that, which would be, okay, so I get the like working within their methodologies, but if you are inviting in people who have kind of been outside their paradigm or outside their nation state, I'm just wondering if you have had any thoughts or case study around specifically doing that.
Yeah, there are some cases, especially indigenous peoples that have migrated to cities, for example, has happened that they have their own dynamics in in urban spaces. But at the end, if they have like the identity, they know what's about. So they are going to replicate their practices in the city, but it's not in the other way. Like they at least here and with the Amazon cultures, they replicate usually in the cities their own practices. So you have to do the same. But if you have another kind of context, for example, with Afro cultures, for example, that they have lost a little bit more like their own cultures. Usually you have to think maybe more creatively, but with the Amazon indigenous peoples, we don't have that kind of problem. Like they're very proud of their own practices, so they're going to work with that, I think.
Okay, thank you. Melina?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Juan Manuel and Noah. Thank you for bringing. I learned a lot from the perspective of how interact the biogeographical spaces with the cultural spaces, and I really appreciate your presentations. My questions is my main question is about conflict resolution, because I know that for the especially indigenous people living in these colonized spaces is very, very conflictive and deeply wound, not just in the relationship with the territories, but like the daily relationship with other cultures, or the colonizer culture especially. And my question is, what have you learned about the capabilities of conflict resolution from them? Like what are they bringing to the table in terms of conflict resolution, or what are their needs specifically for conflict resolution about the bioregional manager, or my bioregional, imagining the bioregion, or like integration, or what are the key points of that encounter of cultures?
I'll jump in. That's a very, very sensitive and very difficult point that you have. Thanks for the question, because it's something that I'm talking like of all the positive things that you have in the terrain, but this is something that has to do a lot with the reality at the end. That has to do with how to solve conflicts that you have in a very conflictive region, not only because of the own dynamics of the communities, that as any human community they have conflicts, but also because you have so many threats of different actors that are involved in the terrain. Like I show in the presentation, like organized crime organizations, like extractive industries, like so many that it's difficult to not being clear about this issue that has to do with the conflict. But something that I've learned from this experience, at least, is, for example, this all, at least the idea of building an alliance of different peoples has to do a lot has to deal with conflict resolution, because you have to know that there are some ancient and historic conflicts that also exist between nationalities. And a big part of the energy that this alliance has to go through and is going through this time has to do of dealing internal problems that you have between indigenous communities. For example, limits, border limits of their territories, or ancient wars that they have between them in their cultures that has a lot of war like war dynamics, like of revenges, and you have to know that that's something that exists. But I remember, and I'm going to just give you a nice like anecdote of a workshop, one of the first workshop that we have of this alliance of the Asha Sacred Headwaters Alliance, where all the elders were together, a lot of the elders, not all, but like the main elders and leaders came together, and they mentioned that they felt that they were building like a marriage between them, because usually in the ancient times, when they have wars, the only way of closing the war, or giving up the arms, was to marry between families, and was a way of using the alliance as a way of finishing the war. So this was a symbol that they used at this beginning of the alliance, was that we need to build marriages between us, and this has to do with our rivers and our territories and our political expectations, because we have a bigger threat that is like above us, above all of us, and we have to deal with that major threat, and we have to go together and like face our problems inside, like, and something to think like what's the priority at this point of the history? We are still going to fight each other, or we're going to get together and fight to the big threat that we have already in our territory, that has to do with all these external threats that we have, our states, the industry, the economic system, the model, everything. So for me, that was a very important lesson that I had, like this idea of using this alliance as a tool of conflict resolution. At the end, was we have to deal with it in a way. So this is a very small aspect that I can share with you, but I'm sure that there's a lot of challenges in that area, and we're going to face even more in the future. So yeah, it's a very important thing. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Juanma. I don't know if you want to add anything to that too. I was just going to say we only have like 2 minutes left, and maybe if Thomas, if you have a succinct question to ask, and then Noah, if you want to respond to that, maybe that's one way of doing that. Unless Noah, you have something to add to that point too.
No, we can take Thomas's question.
Yeah, I'll be succinct. It really interested me that there's been some advances with the states, both in Ecuador and in Hawaii. So it's just like, is there just a sense of like, how did that get better? Like, where has there been that move to a state agencies just getting a bit better at recognizing diversity on the ground and working with it? Just if you can give some sense of how that's come to be when it hasn't in every case.
Okay, perfect, great, thank you, Thomas. And maybe Noah, this will be a great way for you to respond to, and then we can thank the speakers. Go ahead.
Like to say in Hawaii, I feel like a lot of it's been infiltration in terms of getting, people in the offices themselves. And it's, I mean, I've watched, the face of, for instance, the conservation industry here in Hawaii completely change over the last 30 years. And it was very deliberate. There were leaders who, saw a need to get representative voice in our agencies and created programs and pathways and, over a 30-year period where, and I'm the product of one of those programs, and yeah, and it's not like we're the majority or we own the leadership. Like we're not the governor, not the head of the departments, but we have like enough people and voice like on the inside that it's becoming influential and yeah, and it's been I think a very long-term sustained effort in Hawaii, very consistent and at times like aggressive. There's a fair bit of activism in Hawaii that, makes national and international news. I mean, and they take on big fights, like big profile fights, I mean, we've had Hawaiian activism take on like the US Navy for the bombing of Kaho'olawe, or take on the, $10 billion, 30-meter telescope. And, so, yeah, I mean, I think a, it's been a multi-strategy approach that, is both, kind of playing by the books, and then, also, recognizing that the rules aren't always in your favor, and also being, kind of a little bit more aggressive when you have to be. Yeah, it's a strategy. I don't know how replicable it is everywhere. And I'm sure the story and the pathway in Ecuador has been, a totally unique thing as well, And that would be my sense. Don't want to speak for one.
Thank you. So I don't know if either of you have any brief concluding words. I know we're a little bit over time, and I'm sorry if I got carried away with just into the conversation, so let the conversation run. But if Noah or Juanman, do you have anything to finish with? Otherwise, and afterwards I can pass it on to Kate after we thank you both. Go ahead.
No, from my side, just thank you so much for the space. I think that it's very rich to have this kind of discussions and share like our experiences and our context. So I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that we can have some others these kind of spaces. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yep. Likewise. Make them a
Wonderful.
little
So just
later. Make them a little later in the morning, but other than that, yeah, this is great.
well, just leaves us to just thank you both so much for these wonderful, incredibly rich, and inspiring talks that you both gave. I hope it served as more inspiration for the sessions too. And yes, we'd love to have you both involved in many ways as this course goes forward. But so just to thank you both for this, and over to you, Kate. Kate, you're on mute this time. Kate, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much, Kelly and Udi and Juan Manuel and Noah, for a really fantastic conversation. And thanks to all of you who attended as well. I've put the link to the feedback in the chat, and really looking forward to seeing you next time for our conversation with Erica Zarate of the Resilience Earth Co-op in Catalonia, who'll be in conversation with Daniel Christian Val from Mallorca, and Oscar Gusinier of La Gorocha bioregion in Catalonia. So thanks very much once again, and take care. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Bye.
Aloha.